Well, I am Diane Blazek. I am the Executive Director for National Garden Bureau, and we are here today to talk about Asclepias, commonly known as the milkweed. And I have three wonderful panelists from our NGB members here. I will briefly introduce them and then I will let them introduce themselves and their companies. And by the way, throughout this webinar, you're going to see some links posted in chat, and those are coming from Gail Pabst in our office. So she's going to be giving you links to things that are on our website or blogs or our Year of program, etc. So with that, let's get started. We have Dylan from Pan American Seed. We have Jessica from Applewood Seed, and we have Megan. Megan is a first timer for us, so welcome. You are from
Thank you.
American Meadows. And since you're our first timer, oh, Jessica, you're a first timer also, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
Oh my goodness. And this is only Dylan's second. So, oh goodness, we have newbies. Hey, or everybody attending, maybe ask some hard questions. No, I'm just kidding. But let's start with you, Megan. You can introduce yourself and your company.
Sure, happy to. My name is Megan Foster. I work at American Meadows. We're an online gardening retailer. So we specialize in wildflower seed mixes, as well as small, young potted plants and bulbs. So kind of green gardening goods, not a lot of hard goods. And we also have a sister brand, High Country Gardens, which is based in the West for specifically Western gardening specialization. But yeah, so I am, I think I'm approaching my 6th anniversary as the category manager in charge of sourcing and managing the perennial and bulb categories at American Meadows, the brand. So yeah, I have a couple seasons every year of sourcing from a number of vendors and growers for our American Meadows customers. And milkweed is a big part of what we do.
Excellent. Okay. And Jessica, since you're our other newbie, we're going to let you go next.
Sounds good. Thank you. Happy to be here. My name is Jessica and I work for Applewood Seed Company. We're based out of Colorado and we've been around since 1965. We're celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. And we are a wholesale company. So we focus on open pollinated flowers, grasses, and herbs. And we sell to other packet companies that consumers yourselves might be purchasing from, as well as departments of transportation, government, farmers, landscapers, golf courses, a whole array of different kinds of businesses. We focus on ornamental plants as well as native plants, and sometimes there's a nice overlap between those two categories. My role in particular, I do some account management, and I also am our product and trial garden manager. And we work with growers domestically as well as all over the world to produce the seeds that we are then selling back out. We have a 1/4 acre trial garden on our site here where we get to do a lot of research and we sell individual species as well as mixes and a lot of pollinator mixes. And we've been grateful to have an ecologist as part of our team for a long time who has done a lot of research on pollinator activity with different plants out in our trials. And that really informs a lot of the work we do with our pollinator mixes. And let's see what else. We carry about 720 different species and natives across our portfolio.
Just a few.
Yeah, just a few to manage.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. And Dylan, welcome back for your second webinar that we've done.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. So happy to be back here. My name is Dylan Sedmak, and I work with Pan American Seed. Pan American Seed is a breeder of flowers and vegetables. We really focus a lot on annual breeding. So some of our flowers that you might be familiar with would be like wave petunias. And then my role with the company is, I started off as a technical liaison visiting greenhouses to help growers, and now I manage our vegetable portfolio. So I get to work a lot with the breeding program on vegetables. And we do carry a couple tropical Asclepias in our assortment to grow more as annuals, but I also have a very strong personal passion for perennials. I love to garden. I've got a couple of Asclepias at home, some there intentionally and some there unintentionally. So hopefully I can speak from personal experience on some of the species, and hope to find them in the wild too. So happy to be here.
Excellent. A lot of passion in these three panelists, I think. So, okay. Here's the new question that I always like to start our webinars with. So I want you to envision you're at a cocktail party or some sort of social event and somebody finds out what you do. You just gave them your elevator pitch like you just did for us. What's the number one question they ask about milkweed or Asclepias? I'm sure they're calling it milkweed, but what's the first question you get? Who wants to go first with that?
I'll take a stab. I think, and this is honestly one of the questions you get, I think, for a lot of stuff when you're considered the plant person. It's just that, can I grow it? Is it hard to grow? And my answer would be especially for Asclepias, it really isn't. Depending on the species, too, it's quite easy to grow. In fact, it'll grow even when you don't necessarily want it to. So go for it. And it just comes down to picking the right variety. So that's my answer.
Okay, who's next?
I would say I get a lot of questions about how to grow it too. Questions, well, maybe not at a cocktail party, but at least the customers that I work with are usually the companies that are selling it out to the public and want to make sure that these seeds will be easy enough to grow. And there is a tricky little thing about Asclepias in that the seed has some dormancy. And that means that it typically likes to have a cold period outside before it's ready to germinate, kind of mimicking nature if the seed was to drop in the fall and wait all winter long and then germinate in the spring. And so I get a lot of questions about how to handle dormancy and making sure that consumers know how to do that so that they can have a successful growing season with them.
I think we will address that later in the webinar then. So that's good. Okay, Megan, and you.
Sure. Mostly I hear which one should I plant? And that, we typically talk a lot about, well, where is it? It's native range, and that will, thrive in those conditions, similar to where your home is, but also possibly provide more benefits to the ecology around you as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So I think what we'll do is I have some additional questions for all of you that I'm going to start with. And yes, we have this PowerPoint that's showing. We're not going to do a formal PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to occasionally click through so that you can see some of these pictures like this. But while I ask questions and our panelists answer them, you're going to see some additional pictures there. So if you have questions on a specific variety, just pop it in the chat or the Q&A, either one. But I think where I want to start is the different types of milkweed. I've heard each of you say a little bit about that. So I know, Jessica, you wrote our fact sheet. So maybe if you want to start talking about some of the more popular ones or maybe some of the less popular ones, or you guys can talk about your recommended ones, maybe by region, because I think that's like the first thing when you're deciding, oh, I'm going to grow this milkweed because I want to do it for my pollinators. Which one do I grow? How many types are there? So I'll send this over to you now.
Sounds good. So there are over 70 different native milkweeds to the United States. So there's a lot more than what we generally see in marketing and plants and seeds for sale. About 30 of those have benefits for monarch caterpillars and butterflies. So there's kind of an increased emphasis on those. And then even kind of more narrow from there is a smaller group that are really available to buy as plants and seed. At Applewood, we carry 5 different species of milkweed and are always working on production methods for more species. It is really important to us that folks have access to native species for their area. So some of the more popular ones that that folks are looking for is butterfly milkweed. So that's the Asclepias tuberosa. And that is thankfully native to a really large area in the United States. The only areas that are exempt from that native status is really kind of the Pacific Northwest and kind of Montana, North Dakota area. But that's a really great one. It has a lot of ornamental value, and I'd say it's probably one of the more tame looking milkweeds in terms of its kind of ornamental presentation in the garden. Some of the other, or another great one is swamp milkweed. That's Asclepias incarnata. That one's also, I'd say a little bit more tame. It's not going to spread too aggressively. There are white or kind of rose colored bloom options on that one. And that is native to most of the United States as well, with the exception of the very West Coast. And then the Syriaca and the Speciosa are two more that are quite popular, native to different sides of the country. The showy is the Speciosa, that's native to the central and western US, whereas the Syriaca is the common milkweed that's native to the eastern and central. These are both, they are quite pretty, but they will spread more aggressively around your garden. So you have to kind of manage them a little bit more. And then the fascicularis is the narrow leaf milkweed, and that's native to the western coast. And that is, it has narrow leaves like the name calls for. I think it's quite pretty. The flowers are kind of a pink and white bicolor, and great option for ornamental. It'll spread some, but you can kind of pull them out a little bit as they're coming up each year if you need to keep it in check.
Okay. Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned where they are naturally growing and which areas they may not do well in, because we do have people from all over. And I think all of that is identified in our year of fact sheet. And I noticed that Gail just put a link to that. So if you want to learn more about those, but Megan and Dylan, you want to add anything else to that as far as different types available or your experiences with them?
Yeah, I feel like echo a lot of what Jessica said, but we do typically carry the species and the cultivars thereof that are have the largest native ranges. So we do not typically find we have consistent source or material from some of the smaller range species. And that has been a challenge to maintain over time. But the one you're on right now, Ispele, is a classic cultivar of Incarnata that is the beautiful white flower, and it's pretty easy to grow and beautiful as well, and functional in the landscape. So it's a longtime favorite.
Excellent. Okay. Dylan, anything else to add before we start talking about how to grow this?
Yeah, just a couple quick things. One is a species we do carry at Pan American. It is really best grown as an annual. It's Asclepias crassivica. So that is native to the Central America and the Americas and the Caribbean. And it can be evergreen down in zone 9. However, this would be the silky on the slides, by the way. It's the silky series we carry. However, like I said, I really like to use it as an annual plant. Really, really great food source temporarily for monarchs, of course, for nectar, and also for the caterpillars to eat the foliage. It can spread, and so that's why I say, if we're going to grow it, try to grow it maybe more just as a annual in the summer. But the nice thing that I like about the Crassivica is that it does flower fairly continuously throughout the season. So if you're in Ohio like I am, it's great as an annual to plant once we get past, say, our frost-free date, and then it'll flower essentially from spring all the way to the end of summer. So really like the silkies, and they do make good cuts as well, cut flowers. But I really love our native species as well, because those are the ones that'll perennialize in my garden, and that's what I love the most. So, Jessica had alluded to some of the more tame ones. I know we're going to talk about this more, but especially with Asclepias, I really like the ones that clump versus spread rhizomatically. And so she said, tuberosa, great option. The butterfly milkweed, and then the swamp milkweed incarnata, which Megan and Jessica both mentioned, great clumping option too. That looks good and usually stays where you plant it. But we'll get to some of that later, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, yeah. And we have a quick question here that doesn't really fit in with any of our planned questions for later. So I want to pop it up here. Should there be a concern if milkweed is grown in beds at a children's zoo?
You know, with milkweed, their latex is toxic. Now, I guess if there's concern about having it too close to the children because they may eat the plant, I guess it would be the same concern you might have if they're going to eat any plant. Now, where I could see it maybe being a problem, especially around kids, is their fruits are. I mean, I think there might be some pictures later, but their fruits they're quite, I don't know, showy and hopefully not tempting to a child, but maybe if that's something you're concerned about, maybe just clip off the fruits so they don't look like something the kids could eat.
Yeah, I think the bitter taste is usually a good deterrent, and the milky sap that comes out of the stems when you break them. So that's usually a good deterrent for kids and dogs with milkweeds. But yeah, like Dylan said, there is that toxicity there. So it is an element. It's considered somewhat poisonous to like livestock and animals that maybe aren't as concerned with bitterness.
Well, that's true. I'll say that as a child, one of my favorite memories and the feelings that I have about milkweed is from the neighbor's meadow where I grew up playing with common milkweed pods in the fall, making little, fairy nests for them, using the seeds and the silk and playing with the silk and letting it go. So there's definitely a lot of benefits to having milkweed around, and as with most plants, it's not something that's going to be giving you a rash or something when you're touching it. It is really about ingestion that you want to avoid, which is does have that yuck factor.
Thank you for that. That was a good question. Are there any of these types that bloom later and cause monarchs to stay locally instead of migrating?
So I'll say that most of these species you'll have bloom like a heavy concentration in midsummer. Now, Syriac the common milkweed, you might get a little bit longer bloom period out of that. But I'll say the Carasavica, that tropical one I mentioned, the silkies, they will bloom basically as late as the weather permits. So they can provide a food source for monarchs later, even into the fall season.
Were either one of you going to comment on that one also?
I was just going to say with the Carasavica, that's one that you do want to, and Dylan alluded to this too, is growing it as an annual, especially in the southern areas, like in the Gulf states or in kind of mild parts of California. When you grow it as an annual, that kind of encourages the monarchs to continue south and not stick around too long, and it also can interrupt a cycle where there's a parasite that can linger on those leaves if they don't senesce or die back in the fall. And so it's when you cut it down, you stop that spore and parasite process from happening that can pass on to the monarchs and cause them health problems. So just cutting it back and growing it as the annual is important for that species.
Okay, great tip. Thank you. Okay, so now we've got another question, and I know this is going to be kind of difficult to answer without seeing it. So Sandy says, I saw a deep orange-red colored Asclepias tuberosa growing in a park among the regular orange ones in northern Illinois last year. Wondering if that's a named variety or was it a color mutation?
I only know of one selection of tuberosa, and that is Hello Yellow. There might be more I'm not aware of, but I haven't seen a darker orange one. So if it truly was a tuberosa, then that could just be Mother Nature there, and that sounds like a pretty cool natural selection.
It could have been the
I haven't seen
Curaçaoica
it.
too, the tropical milkweed that has a more red color.
Okay. Now we've got another, well, actually two questions. We're kind of skipping over all the general growing, but we'll get to that because we have two questions about shall I call them pests? One is saying my milkweeds were covered with lanternfly nymphs early last summer in New Jersey, but then only saw one the rest of the summer. Has anyone else experienced that? And what maybe should I do about it? So after you answer that one, I've got another question about pests.
With the lantern flies, they're really just starting to make it over here into Ohio. I can't speak to too much personal experience yet here. My knowledge with those, especially I would say more on tree species, is that they, at least I know with trees, they don't always take down the tree. However, it's like a general decline of the plant. I could imagine on an herbaceous plant like milkweed, you might see a little bit more dramatic effect. Um, yeah, I can't say why that there might be less on them later on in the season, unfortunately.
Yeah, similar to Dylan, I don't have a lot of personal experience, but the, the word on the street is don't let those nymphs become adults.
Exactly.
And that's the recommendation that we're hearing in the horticultural community.
So then the other question is about aphids, and I loved how she worded this question. Are there any plants that will distract or detract aphids from Asclepias, or how to manage them? Or should I just keep growing more and more Asclepias so there's enough for everybody?
Yeah, aphids are pretty common on Asclepias, and the challenge with managing pests on the Asclepias is that if you try to treat them with anything, or even with aphids, commonly people will just try to spray them off with water, which can often work. All of those methods will negatively impact if there are monarch eggs on the plants. So you kind of want to be careful that you're not also interrupting the monarch cycle along with the other pests that you're trying to treat. The aphids, you could try planting nasturtiums. They might be a good trap crop to bring some of the aphids to another part of the garden. But yeah, generally the aphids won't take down the milkweeds. They just might look a little bit unsightly.
Yeah, I think that's really what we, are saying as well. Just having a little bit more of an acceptance around understanding that this is a natural part of our ecosystem, having these aphids on the Asclepias, and the water treatment, or even just like physically removing them. If you have a small garden where you're seeing your one specimen is getting taken down, or just like covered, you can physically remove. They don't hang on too tight, and that can help mitigate it.
Yeah, and the aphids that I usually see here on most of our milkweeds in Ohio are like the oleander ones, so those like bright orange guys. And yeah, I totally echo what Jessica and Megan said. If you really want to get rid of them, I'd really just stick to a mechanical method like water and avoid using pesticides so you don't have collateral damage on the monarchs. And really, if you think about it, those aphids are actually native to the U.S. And so they've essentially co-evolved with Asclepias over thousands of years. So those Asclepias will withstand that damage. But if it is an issue, I think water is probably the preferred method.
Okay.
Oh,
And
sorry. I did think of Dan. I did remember one more too, just on companion plants too, because there's one thing that we can talk about, which is planting companion plants to attract predatory insects of the aphids can also help. So with the aphids, using things like alyssum to attract parasitoid wasps that will attack the wasps can also, or attack the aphids could also be beneficial.
because that was one of the questions, companion plants. So you named alyssum, Jessica, you named nasturtiums. Any others that you want to suggest for companion plants, either for purposes of the pest or just things that look great together?
Well, with this one right here, this is Asclepias tuberosa. We love, like your salvia, your purple salvias. So bloom together, great, pollinator nectar plant as well. Not non-native to the North America, but a really beautiful kind of striking combination.
And how far away should you plant them? I mean, is it like at the base of them so that they just go to that plant instead, or should they be 3 to 6 feet away? What's a general guideline there?
Depends on the mature width of the species that you're working with, but the tuberosa is a nice chunky, as Dylan mentioned, kind of bulking plant there. So you want to give them enough room to have their own, area to mature to. So if you're starting with a young plant, not too close.
Okay, good. So now let's kind of get back to the basics. It sounds like a lot of our attendees have experience growing Asclepias, but for those who don't, where do you get started? I mean, obviously choosing the right type, which Jessica went over, that's in our article and everything. Do you buy plants? Do you buy seed? What time of year to plant plants, depending on where you're at? What time of year to plant seed? You talked about the dormancy thing. So I've got a lot of questions there, all in one, about where do I get started and how do I plant them?
Well, I'll let Jessica and Megan talk about the seed starting part.
Yeah, I would say that it's if you're a very beginning gardener, it's probably not going to be your easiest seed to start, but I don't want that to deter you either. There's some tricks that can definitely help you along the way. So with starting seeds, there are a couple of different options. You could grow them directly out in the garden. Or you could start them indoors in pots and grow them there and then plant them out. So I'll talk about the direct sowing method first, and then we could talk about plugs after that. For direct sowing, there's a couple of different times of year that you'd want to plant. The first one to consider would be in the fall. And that will give the seed that opportunity for that cold period naturally over the winter. The trick with planting in the fall is that you want to make sure you're putting your seed down after you've had some frosts already. So like in Colorado, we will commonly have a snow in October, but then we might have a month or more of really warm weather. And if you've put your fall planting down already, that will allow the seeds to germinate, which we don't want to happen. We want them to just stay dormant out in the garden all winter long and then germinate in the spring. So that's the trick, is just waiting for a couple of cold snaps and then putting them down in the fall, just making sure that there's good seed to soil contact when you're direct sowing any seeds out in the garden. The other option would be in the springtime, so early spring before your last frost. That will also help with that cold period. And if you don't have seeds until after your last frost, you'll want to do this cold stratification process that sounds fancy and complicated, but it's actually pretty easy to do. So to mimic winter indoors, you would take your seeds and put them in a damp paper towel and then into a plastic bag, and then just put them in the refrigerator, and you can forget about them for a whole month. And then when they come out after that 30-day period, they'll have experienced their own little personal winter, and then they can get planted out into the garden in the early summer or late springtime period. And then if you want to transplant the seeds, you could start them indoors probably like 8 to 10 weeks before planting out in your spring season. So somewhere around February or March, you'd want to put them in some growing medium under lights. And One thing with Asclepias is they want to stay wet, but not too soggy. And they really like well-draining soil. So it's just a little bit of a balance with moisture management with them. But yeah, those are my tips. I'm sure Megan and Dylan have many others to add.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with the potted plugs, but if as you plant the milkweeds, a lot of times many of the more commonly sold species have a taproot, and they don't really love it to be messed with. So a little bit more care than my usual amount of like ripping the pot off of the plant. So a little bit more delicate treatment of unpotting and then putting in the soil. So just a little less disturbance is ideal for transplanting your young Asclepias to your garden. It's my tip. But similarly to Jessica, our seed milkweed planting instructions on our website for our customers, it's 30 days cold stratification. Just give them their little winter. I love that way that you put that.
Their own personal winter. Yeah, that was good. Anything else, Dylan?
No, I mean, I think we'll probably get into more of the culture here shortly. But the big thing, of course, with Asclepias, even our native ones, is like they really are warm season plants. They do not do well in the cold. And I can say, for example, I used to be a perennial grower back in the day in Ohio, and we used to grow Asclepias, before May in a hoop house, a heated hoop house, in the low day lengths, the low light. They just do not do well. So even if you try to force them a little early, just something to consider. So really waiting till you get to that warm season in your area, and they will just take right off.
Great. Okay. So you answered some of the questions that I had about how to start seeds. That's great. And what about in the garden? Are they full sun areas or can they grow in partly shady areas?
Full sun is definitely preferred. That's pretty much across the board for the Asclepias, in my experience.
Yeah, for
all the
sure.
varieties
Full
we
sun.
sell the same.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, good. Thank you. Um, so earlier when Jessica was going through the different types and the regions for each native type, does that mean that I shouldn't plant, if I'm in California and this one is not native there, should I not plant it in my region or can I, how bad is it or how okay is it to do that?
It really depends on your goals, I think, as a gardener. So a lot of times we're almost immediately thinking about monarchs when we're talking about milkweeds, because of the kind of iconic value of the monarch to kind of our landscape and how we feel about the environment and things like that. There's like almost that immediate connection, but it's actually not necessarily the only reason you might want to have milkweeds. So there are, the beautiful orange flowers that we're looking at right here, the tuberosa. You can plant them. I think the concern Jessica raised about Carassa, the tropical milkweed species that is a host of that pathogen for monarchs, is just one of the concerns where if it's not going to be killed over a winter, to cut it back so that the pest is not continuing on for the springtime the following year. So that's the one real heads up, raise your hand kind of one to not try. But like we said, like if you're looking for that kind of ecological value as one of the reasons for planting, look at the maps. I have a link to a very old school but very useful set of maps for all of the native ranges for the North American bow maps. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, but I love this resource. I'm going to pop it in the chat.
I was just going to ask if you could put it in the chat. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
So, I have a question. You were talking a little bit about, I don't know if you used the word aggressiveness, but you were talking about different ones that would spread or would not spread. So one question, are any of these on the USDA invasive list anywhere?
So none of them are considered noxious. There is not a single federal invasive list for the country. And invasive is a term that's usually more defined on the state to even county level. So it's very kind of specific to different areas. Yeah, on a federal level, none of them are considered noxious, which would be kind of the highest degree of problematic.
Great, thank you. Yes, I think it's super important to know your own state. You know, just because something might be on a noxious list in another state does not mean that it would be in your state. So it's, you know, gardening is a very region specific and it's very personal, you know. So Megan, you were talking about your own goals for your garden. And of course, you know, the different states, the different areas all have a special spot and a special need, an opportunity. So that's good. So kind of along with that, how, if you have one and you love it and it's attracting monarchs or any of the other beneficials that you want, and it does start spreading, you had talked about tuberosa, you know, those are spreading through the tubers, right? So is there a good way to control the growth?
Um, so, I think Jessica said at the beginning, highlighting those two species in particular that are very amenable to garden culture, but also more clumping. So the tuberosa and the incarnata are great because they don't spread, through rhizomes. Um, but when we go to species like the common milkweed, like Syriaca, which shows up everywhere, it can do very well in the garden, and sometimes a little too well, because it will spread to those rhizomes, those underground stems. And so for those ones, site selection is super important, because where you plant it, it will spread. So if you have a very large open area or live in a rural zone, and you've got some space you want to cover up, then sure, go ahead and plant it. So that's kind of siding based on the rhizomes. But the second thing I just wanted to just mention here is their seeds spread very easily. I think you're probably all familiar with how their seeds spread, right? They're very beautiful, but they also germinate very easily too after that winter stratification. So sometimes you'll get some volunteers come up in the garden, and that's totally fine if you're right to pick them up, but just keep an eye on them because they will get bigger and they will start getting a little more aggressive from there. So either cut off the seed pods if you'd like, or just pull up the little seedlings next year.
Yeah, same for me. Just the little seedlings. I think they're very distinctive as they come up. And if you have a nice population going and you like the size of it, just keep culling those young plants on the sides because you're not hurting much by doing that. There's no kind of need to kind of let everything go if you want to control it. Just pull them up.
Okay. So that was talking about this end of the spectrum, but I'm going to go back to starting. Jessica, you had talked about starting seed, but overall, what kind of soil do they like? Do you need to fertilize them like the first year of growth? What's your recommendations there? Are they pretty hardy and it's just like toss them out there and they're going to do great?
So the type of soil, it does depend on the species to some degree, but in general, they like a more well-draining soil. Of course, the incarnata swamp milkweed, that's going to like a little bit more moisture than the others. And yeah, some of them like the Syriaca and Speciosa will be more tolerant of some of the heavier clay soils as well. I would not recommend fertilizing. It's not typically needed for natives. It might even have a negative impact on them. So no need to fertilize there. Watering is just critical in that establishment period and through the first year. And then in subsequent years, they're pretty tough plants. Once they're established, I mean, they really don't need too much attention. They might need some supplemental water throughout the season, but they don't need too much babying after that first establishment year.
Yeah, one of the things I really love going back to that swamp milkweed is that if you've got a lot of different sites in your garden and you've just got that like low-lying site that always pools up with water, especially even like seasonally in the spring when you get your rain showers, um, that's a lot of plants can't do well there, but the swamp milkweed will do very well, and it'll do great not only when it's, completely inundated with water, but even once it's established, once you get to the summer, it can tolerate a little bit more of the summer drought. So it's a very flexible plant if you've got a spot that's seasonally very, very wet.
I just figured out where I'm going to plant my swamp milkweed. Excellent. Okay. Um, what about, we talked about pests, we talked about the aphids and everything. What about diseases? Are there just some diseases that are common in milkweeds? And if so, are there some varieties that are resistant, or do you have some cultural type tips that might help prevent those diseases?
I'll say I mean, even growing them in the greenhouse setting, they are fairly free of diseases. You will sometimes see on older leaves, like there might be getting some purpling or spot and speck here and there, but generally, from what I've seen, they've been pretty clean on fresh material.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. We don't see a lot of disease issues out in the garden either. So they're really tough.
And as a retailer, we hear from a lot of customers, but disease on Asclepias is not really something that we do hear about. So I can concur on that.
Excellent. You guys were unanimous on that one, so that's wonderful. Um, so milkweed in my garden, and what if I like a nice, tidy, refined garden, not anything overgrown. Sorry. I don't want to imply that they're overgrown, but just design or maintenance tips. What do you guys have? You all have obviously grown a lot of them. And so is there some tips that you have for keeping it a little bit tidier or well maintained, or what do you plant with it so that it looks a little tidier?
I think it really is going back to Jessica and Dylan saying, look, it's about the selection of the plant that you're going to put in there. I think common milkweed is probably not the one for you. And tuberosa is a great pick to get started with something that's a little bit more controlled and really looks fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, it's like if you want a tidy garden, formal number one is choose the clumpers rather than the rhizomatous ones. And two is, even when we do have the clumpers like incarnata and the tuberosa, their flower set's fairly concentrated in the central summer, and then outside of that, they're just green, which for a lot of people that's totally fine. But what you might consider is from a design aspect is planting some shorter perennials around them that might be more in color throughout the season, just to have color throughout the season. So even when the Asclepias aren't in color, you still get a little bit of show, especially on the incarnata because they will get taller. Some of the selections like Cinderella, especially, will get quite tall. So having things to kind of what I say like cover up the legs during the off season is kind of nice too.
Okay, great. So somebody just had a question about this one, the Physocarpa. It died out, and does it have a small native range? And would it be best to buy from seeds or plugs or young plants?
So that one is not a US native, it's native to Africa. And the research shows that it will provide food for the caterpillars, and they will lay eggs on it. The diet of the caterpillars, it does impact them through their whole life cycle, even when they come into their maturity as butterflies. And so I think there is some question as to kind of the chemical difference of planting some of these non-native ones, and yeah, just needing more research about how that might be impacting the monarchs. But they will use it, and it is certainly a really interesting looking one.
Yeah, this Physocarpa, they've got a couple common names for it. I don't know if I'm allowed to say them on this
I wasn't
webinar.
going to say them, so if
You
you
can
want to, that's fine.
you can get hairy balls. Anyway, so you know, it's a really cool looking plant. As Jessica said, maybe don't necessarily think about it so much as a monarch haven, but as an ornamental annual. I've seen this even in suburbs where people will plant it in the ground. It gets quite tall, very very tall, and but just has a statement plant in the front yard next to some whatever annuals and perennials, and it's just the fruits and the architecture are so unique and ornamental. You turn some heads with that.
So yeah, some plants you plant for yourself and some plants you plant for the bees and the butterflies and everything else. So this one, yeah, if you want something interesting, plant that one and then have your others. Let's hear 2 questions for you. Milkweed in pots. It's kind of a general question, and I know we talked about the tropical growing that in containers and everything. What about some of the others? I mean, I guess it depends on which zone you're in. If you have them in a container and large enough, will they overwinter? Would be a question I would have about growing them in pots.
Oh, I will say from personal experience, overwintering Asclepias in containers in temperate environments is a very, very risky business. It's much better, I think, to overwinter them when the root structure's in the ground. And frankly, with perennials in general, overwintering them in containers, you always run a little bit of a risk depending on the root system. But with Asclepias in general, especially like things like tuberosa, the root systems are, I think, a little bit more sensitive in containers over winter. Incarnata, I think you might be able to try it out. Who knows? Probably Syriaca too, but the tuberose I can say is definitely more sensitive.
Yeah, I can't say that I have any experience growing Asclepias and overwintering in containers in my zone 5 world up here, but it may be able to be done, but it would be experimental. And I think it's not something we would recommend to our customers.
Great. Okay. So now another question on the swamp milkweed about surviving occasional flooding that you mentioned. What about tidal brackish water? Would it survive that?
I don't know if it hangs out in brackish environments. I've only ever seen it in freshwater environments. That seems pretty risky. I'd have to look into that. But if it's not adapted to that, it definitely will not survive the saline conditions.
Yeah, same. I unfortunately don't have any experience with that, but it definitely seems questionable unless it's already growing in that native area. I mean, that's always a good clue with natives is to see what its range is, does it exist there naturally, and kind of following those signs of nature.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm thinking more about road salt in our region. That there, if you have salt trucks going by and you're seeing native populations of Syriaca, if you feel good about thinking that might be able to tolerate, but I really don't know either.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem. Okay. A specific question on what type, either the type or the variety that would grow in Aiken, South Carolina. She said she had a lot of success growing milkweed in Illinois, but she's really struggling with which kind to grow in Aiken, South Carolina. So I'm guessing that's probably like a zone 7, 8, maybe.
So the tuberosa, the Syriaca, and the incarnata are all native to that area. So any of those three would be great options.
Very good. Okay. I think what I want to do is give you guys an opportunity to kind of do we still have what, almost 10 minutes. We've got plenty of time to do this. If you could give your favorite tip for growing milkweed. I mean, we kind of started this with the common question, but your favorite tip, and then just go ahead and tell us your favorite variety to grow. It's okay. You can show favorites. So who would want to start with that?
I would say And this isn't really a growing tip, but more of an encouragement to participate in growing milkweeds. The monarch populations have been in decline since the 90s, by, it depends on the kind of estimate and the region, but anywhere from like 80 to 95% declines. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service right now is in a public comment period until March to explore the possibility of listing monarchs as a threatened species, and that will potentially change some things moving forward if it goes ahead. And so anything we can do to provide more food and nesting sites for the monarchs is great. If you're in their flyways in California or the middle of the country, and in Colorado, we're a little bit on the edge here, but we do see them come through our trial gardens every year, and it's always really sweet to see. And we did, I think it was 2 summers ago, we got to see the pupa or chrysalis form on a little overhang of our shed, and got to see it mature through the summer there. So yeah, I just encourage everyone to participate, give them a try. In terms of my favorite one, I happen to really like the narrow leaf milkweed. I keep that one at home, which it does spread, and I'm always pulling up the little ones, but I think it's just a really unique little flower. And I like the narrow leaves on it. I think it's quite ornamental too.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it here. We had a picture of it, but sorry, oh, there it is. Here it is. There we go.
Beautiful. I'll say that common milkweed is by far my favorite. I grew up with it. I have a lot of nostalgia about it, and the smell of common milkweed blooming at night in the summer is just incredibly intoxicating to me. It's just very spicy, and I even know people who make, drinks using it. It's a really incredible smell, and has all these benefits. So I have a little stand in my backyard, transition from lawn to milkweed stand, and enjoy, kind of seeing that expand and looking for the monarchs every year. So it's really fun. And I also love the pods. I think they're really fun for crafts as well. Definitely my favorite, and it is not hard to grow here at all. So given half a chance, it's ready to go, and that also makes it easy and fun for me.
Okay, so you just said 2 or 3 things that we need to follow up on. Okay, so somebody makes drinks with.
Yeah, the nectar. So the nectar in the common milkweed blossoms, the little pink mauve colored blossoms. You can kind of extract that and create kind of like a syrup, a flavor syrup, sort of like you would with like a vanilla syrup or something like that. And it'll pull that essence out of the nectar, out of the flower tops. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'll see if I can dig up a link and send it to you, Diane.
I think maybe you need to write a blog for us, and we'll have a blog on different uses of milkweed. I mean, let the butterflies have them and let the pollinators have them, but if there might be something for us too. And then you mentioned something about crafts. And I know when we were researching for Year of the Milkweed that the seed, the fluff, has been used for flotation devices. It can be used for hypoallergenic pillows and everything. I thought that was fascinating.
There's a company in Quebec I ran into, probably 5 or 6 years ago at like an eco fair in Montreal, about where they were actually bringing back the use of milkweed fluff as a down alternative for comforters, and it was actually kind of initially used, or maybe one of the kind of famous uses of milkweed fluff as an insulation was during one of the world wars, I think World War II, as a water resistant, PFD, like they needed that, there was a lack of, goose down or something. Right. And so there was an alternative found, and they went into high production. So somebody in Canada was trying to kind of bring that industry back to life in kind of the eco home goods space, which was pretty cool.
I love that story. That's great. Okay, Dylan, let's get your tip. I have another question or two, so let's do your tip and favorite variety, and then we'll wrap up with a couple more questions.
Yeah, no problem. I'll be snappy. But yeah, number one tip is site selection. So keep in mind the aggressiveness of the variety and then site accordingly, knowing that you might get some seeds and or spreaders next year. And then favorite variety or type or species, I should say, is definitely the swamp milkweed. I think it's the most amenable. It's got like the clumping nature and it's got the vigor like a syriaca. It's a little more vigorous than tuberosa and just does well in so many different sites in the garden. And I love the smell and the color of it. So it's a cool one.
Okay. Speaking of tuberosa, you must know what my question was here. She says, last fall I had to move a rather old and large tuberosa. I was amazed at the size of the roots or the tubers. What are the odds that this plant will recover from being ripped up and replanted? I mean, I think it's a really good thing that it's big because then even if some of it does die off, you'll still have that plant. But what do you think the odds are? We're
Yeah,
not taking
Luann,
bets. We're not doing anything illegal here. We're just asking for odds.
I think since you transplanted a large plant and in the fall, which is a great time to do it for something like a milkweed. If it was a large one, I think you might have a decent shot. You know, smaller ones, I might be a little more concerned. They usually don't like being transplanted, especially tuberosas in particular. But I don't know if it's pretty big. I think you got a shot.
Okay. So good luck with that transplant. But you did, it sounds like you did everything right. So that's very good. Okay. I think I got through all my questions. It looks like we've gotten through all of our attendee questions, which is wonderful. Sometimes that's a bit of a challenge. Oh, somebody, Megan, you just posted the cordial. So, okay, awesome. So if we can get some additional information from our panelists, we'll do another blog about milkweed and the different things you can do with it. But it just sounds very fun because they definitely serve their purpose, but we could always maybe do a little other fun things with them. So I want to thank all of you. Excellent information. We know so much more now about milkweed, Asclepias. There's a lot of different types, something for everybody, easy to grow, get them established. So, with that, I say it is time for us to go out and look for our plants, look for our seeds, get ready for this summer, spring and summer, and let's help the monarchs, right?